And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. On Fridays this year, I've been talking to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. I am your host, Black Box Ned, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Darren Schaefer. He is the host of the Cooper Vortex, and we're going to be talking not only about the D.B. Cooper case, but also about a connected story, the murder of Earl Cossey. Darren, are you with me?
I'm with you, Ned. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. So, Darren, would you like to provide a basic introduction as to who D.B. Cooper was?
Well, I wish I really knew who D.B. Cooper was, Ned. That's the thing about it. But yeah, D.B. Cooper is the alias given by the man who committed the only unsolved hijacking in commercial aviation.
And would you like to give us a very basic rundown and walkthrough about what D.B. Cooper did back on that day in 1971?
Yeah, November 24th, 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper walks to the gate at the Portland International Airport. He buys a one-way ticket to Seattle. The only identification required at that time was the gate agent asked him his name. He gives his name as Cooper, Dan Cooper. He's one of the last to board the plane via the aft stairs of a 727. And shortly before takeoff, or right after takeoff at 2:50, he hands the stewardess a note. She hilariously assumes that it's just another businessman trying to hit on her, so she puts the note in her purse, and he realizes this, gets her attention, and says, "Miss, you better have a look at that note. I have a bomb." He's now hijacking the airline. Before the plane lands in Seattle, he wants $200,000 and two sets of parachutes ready. The airline agrees to his demands. The passengers did not know the aircraft was being hijacked at the time because Cooper was able to maintain complete control of the situation. They gathered up his money and his parachutes. The plane lands in Seattle. The money and the parachutes are brought on board, and the passengers are released. It's the first time the passengers realized there was a hijacking going on. And at this point in time, Cooper wants to be flown to Mexico City. But more important than where to fly the plane, he instructs the pilots how to fly the plane. So he wants the plane to fly no higher than 10,000 feet, no faster than about 200 miles an hour. He wants the landing gear to remain deployed. He wants the plane to remain unpressurized. He wants the flaps set to 15 degrees, and he wants to take off with the aft stairs down. The pilots aren't even sure if the plane can fly with the aft stairs down, nevertheless take off. So they call into air traffic, ask them, "Hey, can this plane fly with the aft stairs down?" They're like flipping through manuals trying to figure it out. They don't know. They call Boeing, that's just down the street, and Boeing says, "Yes, actually, we've tested that, and the plane can fly with the aft stairs down." So with that flight configuration, the plane doesn't have enough fuel to make it to Mexico City, so the cockpit and Cooper discuss a couple of refueling stops. They agree on Reno. The plane takes off from Seattle to Reno. And somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Cooper departs the aircraft. They land in Reno about 10 o'clock, and Cooper is no longer on board.
Okay, Darren, wow, that was a perfect introduction. Now, you chose to focus your podcast, The Cooper Vortex, on this story. There are lots of true crime cases and lots of unsolved mysteries. Why was it the D.B. Cooper case that you chose to focus on?
Well, it's a bunch of different things that happened all at the same time. So I grew up in Woodland, Washington, and that would have been the closest town. I don't want to really call it a city. I guess it is now, but at the time it was the closest town to where Cooper was believed to have jumped. So it was just sort of this local story that I was kind of interested in. And then my wife got me this book, Skyjack by Jeffrey Gray, in about 2013, 2014. And I read that, and I just really fell into the rabbit hole, or into the vortex, as they call it. And that led me to another book, and then that led me to the forums. And then at the exact same time, I started this job where I work completely alone. So I was listening to 40 to 60 hours a week of talk radio and podcasts. And so I just typed in my Apple Podcast DB Cooper because I was desperate for any DB Cooper media because by now I'm 5 or 6 books deep. And a bunch of other podcasts had done an episode on Cooper, and they all tended to be the same. It was 2 or 3 hosts. They would spend 15 minutes going over the hijacking. Then they would spend 10 minutes covering 3 different suspects in the case. And then they would end the show on who they thought was Cooper. And I listened to a couple of these. There were maybe like I said, maybe 20 or 30 DB Cooper podcasts that you could listen to at that time. And I started listening to all of them, and real quickly I became super frustrated with their description of the hijacking because I'd known so much more at that point in time. So I skipped over that, and I just wanted to hear their thoughts on suspects and maybe who they thought it would be. But I really wanted to hear long form interviews with the authors of these books and the people arguing online and these parachute experts. And I thought, well, maybe I could create that show that I want to listen to. So I ended up doing just that and thought I would be doing it for a few months, but 6 years later, here I am still doing it. Originally, I just want to add this. Originally, I was going to call my show the DB Cooper Podcast because that's how creative I am. But once I really started talking to everyone, they all kept talking about the Cooper Vortex, because once you get sucked in, you can't escape. And I thought, wow, that's what I got to name my show, the Cooper Vortex, not the DB Cooper Podcast.
Well, yes, I mean, I definitely can see why you would have that type of curiosity. But because you have followed this for years, I want to know what you think. In our lifetimes, are we going to see the DB Cooper mystery solved, or will it turn into a cold case that no one will ever crack?
That is the question, isn't it, Ned? I don't know. I think I'm less confident every day that goes by. And we're looking at 53 years have gone by at this point. So my confidence is not high and it's getting lower by the day. I really want this to be solved, but I'm not sure what break is there going to be in this that solves it. And can it even be solved to satisfaction 53 years later? Or are we going to be in another, Jack the Ripper situation where is it even possible to solve now that so much time has gone by?
Yes, those are some big questions, and I'm going to come back to this one later on because there really is something that we can discuss. But in this episode, I also wanted to talk to you about the man who packed the parachutes for DB Cooper, a man named Earl Cossey, who would go on to be a murder victim himself. And he has also been featured in the documentary TV episode In Search of. They did a DB Cooper episode in 1979. He even recreates the DB Cooper sky jump, although he did it during the daytime and Cooper would have jumped at night into inclement weather. He was just trying to demonstrate how it could be done at 10,000 feet, and this is how a skydiver would land in southern Washington and so on. Would you like to provide a bigger introduction as to who was Earl Cossey?
Well, Earl Cossey is an interesting character in the Cooper world. So the beliefs and the information from him has changed over time as more information has become available. Early on in the case, he was absolutely a guy who competed in skydiving competitions. He was, yeah, I guess you could say, a skydiving expert. He had his rigging card and packed parachutes. He was very involved in the community and very well known in the community. When the DB Cooper case happened, depending on if you're talking to Earl Cossey or if you're reading the FBI files, he sort of put out in the beginning that the parachutes belonged to him, and he arranged for those parachutes to go to Cooper. That sort of changed over time with the FBI files coming out. But my interpretation of him is he's a guy that wants to be involved and wants to be important. So if there is this mystery, he wants to be the guy that's giving advice to the FBI. He wants to be the expert in that point of contact, is my impression of him. And then maybe after Jeffrey Gray's work came out and Jeffrey Gray got access to the FBI files, it was revealed that the parachutes actually belonged to Norman Hayden. I almost said Thomas Hayden, but that'd be Thomas Hayden Church, the actor. But Norman Hayden. And Earl
yes, Thomas
Cossey
Hayden
would have been
Church was the Sandman in Spider-Man 3, right? Terrible.
Yes,
terrible.
and not the guy that owned the parachutes. The guy that owned the parachutes was Norman Hayden.
Okay, please continue.
But it is likely that Earl Cossey was the one that packed those parachutes that ended up going to Cooper. But Cossey gave several interviews. I think he sort of enjoyed being this point of contact, especially in the skydiving community where Cooper, and especially in the Pacific Northwest, where Cooper is sort of this legend. To be this point of contact to the FBI and to the media is cool. I understand. But more interesting than that is in May of 2013, unfortunately, his daughter discovered his body in his garage with the apparent blunt force head trauma. And really, nothing else was out of order. Nothing else was sort of missing. His wallet was gone. And then about a month later, his driver's license, his bank cards, and a casino card was mailed back to him. Just those items, no wallet. And that crime remains unsolved today.
That is so bizarre that someone would choose to mail items back to a murder victim, especially things like a bank card and a casino card. I mean, that is not typical criminal behavior, I would say. What do you think?
Well, I've thought about this a lot, and I have a personal example that I can give to this. Because even if it was some crime of opportunity where they hit him in the head with a hammer and they took $400 from his wallet, and then you're walking down the street and you don't really want his driver's license. Maybe you're not going to use his bank cards and whatever else, so you just sort of throw those on the street. I was at work and I discovered a driver's license and like a student ID and a gym membership and like a bowling card. And I picked those up and I Googled the name, and it was some high school kid. And then on Google, there was happened to be some sort of a link with his parents' phone number on it. And so I called him and I was like, hey, I found all this stuff. And so I drove over and I dropped it off. However he lost his wallet, his dad said that it was likely stolen at the bowling alley. And so they took his money or whatever else, and then the contents of the wallet they didn't care about, so they just threw that away. And I discovered it and returned it. And so maybe 2009, they didn't Google it, or there was no information when they punched it in, so they just saw the address on the driver's license with the name. Because I believe it was mailed back to Earl Cossey, was the name it was mailed back to. So it could have been just someone that picked up the driver's license and that contents and mailed it to Earl Cossey at that address, because there was no note or anything associated with it.
Okay, so you think that the person who mailed the license and the bank card was not the killer?
If I had to make a bet, that's what I would bet.
Because then I want to ask you, Darren, do you believe that there was a connection between the murder of Earl Cossey and the D.B. Cooper case?
I don't believe there was a connection. I don't think Earl Cossey has any inside information, but I will say a lot of my Earl Cossey information comes from Bruce Smith, who loves to make connections to the FBI and to what Bruce and a couple other people in the Vortex have referred to as a puppet master, which there's someone behind the scenes of this all, controlling it, planting false information, running propaganda. I don't believe in any of those really, so I think it was probably just a really unfortunate crime of opportunity. Bruce has reported that Earl was a gambler, and so maybe there was some sort of a seedy gambling debt unpaid thing, but there's no real evidence to back that up other than he liked to gamble.
Although that's Bruce Smith's theory about this, do you have an exact theory about what you think happened to Earl Cossey? Because as somebody who is a newcomer to this story, but I do talk about lots of different true crime cases here on Black Box Online Radio, a lot of things that you have laid out is just that somebody saw a man in a vulnerable place, perhaps, and then he just chose to attack him because he wanted access to his wallet. Now, I'm not sure all the steps would have gone down. I'd have to look at a lot more things like a timeline or something. But I mean, I don't even know if there's enough evidence to say that it was a gambling debt. But what exactly do you think happened?
I truly don't know. I would probably lean towards more of a unfortunate crime of opportunity than anything else. Uh, Especially, in this Yaller. I mean, he was in a nice area. I wouldn't say it could be some vagrant or a homeless guy. I'm not sure. There are suspicious aspects of it, like nobody else is around. He wasn't found for 3 days later. So if you had access to all of his home and his possessions, I don't believe anything else in the garage was disturbed. If this is a crime of opportunity, don't you think you would, use the opportunity you just made to take some more stuff? Unless you don't have a way to carry it. I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but the gambling angle is a little bit interesting. If he did have some sort of a crazy outstanding debt, or he actually got some winnings that, rubbed some bookie the wrong way, then that would make sense why nothing was taken really. But I don't know. But I don't see anything that would connect this to the Cooper case for me. Especially because Cossey was very vocal and willing to talk to whoever. He did documentaries, he did interviews with newspapers and with authors. He also was willing to do interviews with wacky DB Cooper researchers like myself. I never interviewed him personally, but Bruce Smith did. I believe Sluggo talked to him, Georger as well.
Okay, though, then, I would actually like to talk about some of the information that Earl Cossey shared. And I brought up the In Search Of documentary episode, and Earl Cossey was featured in that one. And he made a very bold claim about D.B. Cooper and his jump, because, again, Earl Cossey was a skydiver, and he said that if D.B. Cooper was able to pull the cord on his parachute and open the parachute, he thought that Cooper would have survived the jump. Do you think that that is a reasonable assessment? Do you agree with that statement, or do you think it's likely, or do you disagree?
I'd absolutely agree with that. If Cooper pulls his ripcord, he makes it to the ground alive. There's a good chance he could be hurt, but he makes it to the ground alive.
Well, you must understand that a lot of people disagree with that. I was even listening to the Cooper Vortex, and you interviewed Larry Carr, the FBI agent who was on the case, who was, formerly assigned to the case, and he said that he did not believe that Cooper survived the jump. Why would he be wrong?
I'm not sure why Larry believes that, and he's definitely in a hardcore minority in the Cooper didn't survive the jump camp. I see the only way as Cooper not surviving the jump is if he's unable to pull his ripcord. And I don't think Cooper would plan a crime where his only escape is by parachute and he doesn't understand how to pull the ripcord. Specifically, Cossey's statements change over time. So I think Cossey's original statement is like it's a survivable jump and that it's not even difficult and most skydivers could do it. And then his comments changed to something along the lines of Cooper was using a parachute that I modified and he wouldn't have been able to figure out how to pull the ripcord, and it would have been too difficult for him to operate that parachute. To then him publicly stating that he believed Cooper died in the jump, but making statements to people privately that he definitely survived the jump.
I should also point out, though, that when I first learned about the D.B. Cooper case, about 10 years ago, then there were all of these pop culture YouTube channels out there talking about like top 5 unsolved mysteries and so on. And most of them promoted the idea that D.B. Cooper did not survive the jump. And I mean, my simple question to them was, well, where's the evidence? Where are his physical remains? Where's the parachute? I mean, where's the briefcase bomb, the money, all of those things? So, I do agree to a certain extent that it's kind of an uphill battle to say that he did not survive the jump. And again, I saw Earl Cossey do it with my own eyes, albeit during the daytime. But this brings us to another point, though. And I told you I would circle back to this thing about how you can solve the D.B. Cooper case, and it relates to Earl Cossey. I've had Pat Boland as a guest on this program, Cooper Friday, here on Black Box Online Radio. And
she's great.
Oh, yes, because she said that the parachutes had cards in them that were packed, and they were handled by D.B. Cooper most likely. And she claims that it's highly likely that one of the parachute cards was touched by D.B. Cooper, and that might be a source of touch DNA that could be used to identify him. And I'm sure you've heard all of this before, so just really, do you agree or disagree with that?
I hopefully agree with that. I think there is a possibility, but you also have to consider how many people handled that with their bare hands since 1971.
Well, yes, of course, but I guess I'll just ask you the question that I truly wanted to ask. Do they have D.B. Cooper's DNA? Is it possible to get D.B. Cooper's DNA?
I'm not sure what they have. The FBI claims to have a partial profile of DNA that they can use to rule out some suspects, but couldn't use it to positively identify Cooper. Now, I'm not 100% sure what that even means, or if I even trust that they have this partial, or that the partial is Cooper's. So I'm very weary of that. Can we get Cooper's DNA at this point in time? That's a great question. We've tried on the tie recently. It came back. We got a profile that was definitive. There was some insane excitement for a few minutes, and the profile turned out to be Tom Kay, who is the civilian forensic researcher in the case. So it was just this giant balloon that got built up that was burst instantly. But these cigarette butts, we know that those cigarette butts were destroyed. There was a hair slide, or a hair that they believed came from Cooper that they pulled from his seat. And they put that in a slide. And unfortunately, that slide got lost because they mailed it around a bunch of different places. And we've also learned that the glue that they used in 1971 to affix the hair to that slide at this point in time has most likely degraded any DNA that would have been in the hair for us to extract.
Okay, though, but when D.B. Cooper was on the plane, he also famously drank a bourbon and soda, which I believe was mixed with 7-Up. What happened to the glass that D.B. Cooper was handling when he was on the plane?
I've read a few different things about that. There's potentially 2 glasses he handled, but at least one for sure. And it gets put back, and I believe there's some uncertainty on exactly which glass is his. But either way, I don't believe the FBI pulled anything from a glass. I haven't seen any 302s myself that said they got any evidence from any glasses. I know they got a pretty good partial palm print from the armrest, but in 1971 and even today, most people have never taken a palm print.
Right, right. So they would only be able to use that, like, if you already had the suspect and he was still alive and able to provide one.
Exactly.
It's really interesting about how the public learns information about what evidence do the authorities have, and to the credit of Bruce Smith for being skeptical, because here on Black Box Online Radio, I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer every Monday, Zodiac Monday, and they went on national television in 2002 on ABC primetime saying that, okay, we have the Zodiac Killer's DNA and we're going to run it against some of the suspects. And then we learn years later that it's purely questionable. Now, is it completely not the Zodiac's DNA? Not, I'm not even sure. It's just questionable. It's touch DNA from the outside of a stamp that could have been handled by somebody else. So with the Cooper case, it sounds like you're saying some very similar things, that maybe they're telling the truth, maybe they're not, maybe they're mistaken, maybe they thought that they have found this partial profile of DB Cooper, and it's actually someone else's DNA. And is that kind of where you stand?
Yeah, there's also some potential that it's a mixture of more than one partial profile of DNA. I've read so many conflicting reports on that, but I've also read the FBI said they used the DNA comparison to rule people out. So how is it you can say that you're so unsure of your DNA and then also say, yeah, I conclusively ruled this guy out based on DNA? I just, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Absolutely not, because I mean, if something's questionable, then how could someone be ruled out completely? Although, Darren, at this point, I would like to ask, are you comfortable talking about some of the DB Cooper suspects out there?
Oh, absolutely. That's my forte.
Okay, then. I probably should save this one to the end, but I would like to begin because when I first started looking into the DB Cooper case, even before I did the Cooper Fridays segment, I learned about a DB Cooper suspect named E. Howard Hunt, and I saw his name on the suspect list, and I was just thinking, are you kidding me? E. Howard Hunt's a DB Cooper suspect? Because he's a historical figure. He's one of the Watergate conspirators working with the Nixon administration, and I've talked about him on Black Box Online Radio for those things, which he is more well known for. And then, like, I was actually encouraged, by someone who contacted me on Facebook, Black Box Online Radio on Facebook. And as always, you can hit the like button and subscribe here on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Black Box Online Radio. But he's just like, there actually are some points in favor of E. Howard Hunt being DB Cooper. And I did a standalone episode about that. And when I listened to the Cooper Vortex, I got the impression that you begin to think more highly of E. Howard Hunt as a DB Cooper suspect. Is that right? Or is that not right?
Absolutely. I mean, I have all these DB Cooper alerts set up because I'm a total psychopath. And so I got this alert that
you heard him, his admission, not mine.
yeah, absolutely. But I got this alert that there was a new DB Cooper book, and it is called DB Cooper Examined, Identified, and Exposed, or something like that.
Not LeFouc's book, right?
Not LeFouc's book. And I read the one paragraph description on Amazon, and it mentioned E. Howard Hunt, and I thought, this is going to be a ridiculous book. But of course, I have to buy it, and I have to read it. And so I ordered it right away, showed up real quick, and I read the book, and Nat LeFouc isn't like saying, hey, I'm for sure certain that E. Howard Hunt is DB Cooper. He's saying in the book, like, it's an interesting possibility that we should look at, that E. Howard Hunt could be related to this thing. And he also has a chapter on the sketches that is truly fantastic. And Bruce Smith's DB Cooper and the FBI, his third edition, was updated using some work that Nat LeFouc did, and Bruce worked directly with Nat LeFouc on that. And, Nat is a great guy, and his book is fantastic. But to E. Howard Hunt, you think about the timeline. Nixon happens to be meeting with the Najib Halabi, who was either head of United or the FAA at the time, to discuss airline security the day of the hijacking. And here you have one of Nixon's plumbers, a guy who you and I both know could plan and potentially execute something as wild and crazy as this. And then my favorite connection of all is you have him in the Watergate hearings wearing sunglasses. He fits the description of the hijacker, like, of course, everyone does. But, E. Howard Hunt wrote a bunch of spy novels, which is interesting because he was kind of a spy. And so I think he really fancied himself as this James Bond figure and wanted to be and do more of that. And Nat LaFoque sort of theorizes maybe he did this in an effort to change airline security, either with the permission of some sort of a CIA contracting agency or as a Nixon administration unofficial, that he could do this and pull it off with or without permission. And if he got caught without permission, then he could sort of say, well, look, this is why I did it. And then they would sort of cover his tracks for him. It's an interesting theory. And it's not out of the realm of possibility and not nearly as far-fetched as some other Cooper suspects, in my opinion.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience when I was going through Nat LaFoque's book for my E. Howard Hunt episode, because I kind of thought what you were thinking, that, all right, this is just going to be some wild conspiracy theory, but I really appreciated about how he was trying to challenge some commonly held beliefs about D.B. Cooper, because he's saying that so many people think that D.B. Cooper had to be some type of working class underperformer who did this maybe 10% for the thrill and 90% for the money. And he's like, wait a second, maybe that's not true. In an unsolved case, why do we have to just only zone in on suspects like that? So he's exploring the case in a different way. But one question, though, is it true that E. Howard Hunt had trained to jump in a business suit, and like he had trained to just jump in the type of clothes that D.B. Cooper had been wearing? Like, but was that part of his training back in the paratrooping days?
I'm not certain of that. And it's probably been like 2 or 3 years since I read that book. So I'm not really qualified to comment on that at the moment. But I do remember sort of reading something like that. Also, it wouldn't surprise me. E. Howard Hunt would have been the type of guy who would have wanted to jump in a suit.
James Bond complex, right?
Absolutely.
So would you say that E. Howard Hunt is your top D.B. Cooper suspect?
No, not at all.
And who would be your top suspect?
Well, that changes every once in a while because I'm sort of a gullible fool. I
No,
think,
no, no, no. You mean you followed the evidence, right?
yeah, that's what I do.
Right.
Or whichever I happen to read most recently. But Ted Braden has always been this suspect in the vortex that won't go away. Sure, he's too short, or maybe his eye color is a little bit off, but absolutely this is a guy that could have planned and executed something like this. Absolutely, this is a guy that could have controlled the situation the same way that Cooper did. Along those same lines, a newer suspect, Lauren Skip Hall, is sort of cut from the same cloth as Ted Braden. He's seems to be involved in various shady government and anti-government agencies, both in the United States and Cuba. He's working for sort of like a Cuban mafia ran casino. He's working for these political activist groups and mercenary groups going by aliases. He's a wild, interesting suspect. Also, an insane connection to the JFK assassination. I mean, not even a connection. If you're involved in the JFK at all, Lawrence Skip Hall was involved in some of that testimony and is interviewed by several different agencies, and his name is mentioned in many, many different reports on it. So Ted Braden, Skip Hall, very similar suspects. There's nothing about those individuals where you would say it can't be them. The only thing is, like, can you put them in Portland? Can you put them on the plane? And which, of course, we can't do. So you get them to a certain point where it's like, yeah, they could have done this, and yeah, they match the description, and yeah, everything fits, but you can't move the ball much further. As far as some more wild card suspects that I like, I've always been a fan of Wolfgang Gossett. I just think he's so interesting, and the fact that he confessed to his sons on it's either their 18th or 21st birthday. I'd have to go back and listen to that again, but he also confessed to two different lawyers in two different states. It's an interesting story, and I'm not sure how much of it is he's a dead ringer or if I want him to be Cooper. Another newer suspect that's pretty interesting is Milton Vordal. Vordal comes from a completely different avenue than those other suspects. Vordal is found sort of out of the particles on the tie. In the examination of D.B. Cooper's tie, we were hoping to find some sort of maybe a pollen from a flower that only grows, in this county in Nebraska, where we could narrow the search down to this area. But instead, we find an insanely rare combination of exotic metals and elements and materials that really can't be explained. So you have people searching down this road where were all these where did all these tie particles come from? And we chased it down to basically titanium metallurgy, thanks to the work of Ryan Burns and Nikki Broughton. They sort of stumbled across this guy, Milton Vordal, who was a very eccentric person and involved in the early R&D of metals and titanium specifically. And there are just so many things about him that fits, but unlike the other suspects I just mentioned, he doesn't have parachuting experience. He wasn't in the military. We can't account for that, but everything else we can. Whereas like a Ted Braden, obviously he could do this, but now we have these tie particles, and now I'm sort of like grasping at straws to account for how Ted Braden or Skip Hall would have had these rare particles on the tie. It's just another one of these things in the Cooper case that's so infuriating. It's like we're looking for some military daredevil badass, but oh wait, we have these tie particles, so scratch that. We're looking for some nerd in metallurgy. But no, wait, we're looking for someone that's somehow both.
Yes, that is one of the more complicated aspects of the mystery. I would like to remind everybody that I am talking to Darren Schaefer. He is the host of the Cooper Vortex, which you can get here on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you have any ideas for future episodes of Cooper Friday, you can put them in the comments section down below. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com, and you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. But I want to come back to something about Ted Braden, Darren, because you talked about how Ted Braden might have had the wrong eye color. And if you just get on Google Images, you're going to see the composite sketches of D.B. Cooper that are drawn with brown eyes. Now, Ted Braden had green eyes, right? And also, from time to time, you'll see suspects that have blue eyes that come into the mix. Do we really know with certainty what color D.B. Cooper's eyes were?
No, not really. Florence Schaffner is the only stewardess to see him without his sunglasses on. And there's also a chance that she got a good look at his eyes because when he passes the note off to her, she just puts it in her purse, like I mentioned. Now, at this point in time, he is going to be looking at her and then realizing she's not looking at the note. So he's looking at her to make sure that she makes eye contact with him. So I think in this moment, she would notice his eye color. She says it's brown. No, I don't want to like shit all over Ted Braden or the Ted Braden supporters out there. And there are pictures of Ted Braden where his eyes are more hazel. And I I don't know how much weight I put in eye color. If DB Cooper, the case is solved tomorrow and he has blue eyes, am I going to be surprised? Not really. So I don't put that much weight in it. Also, with Ted Braden, I mentioned he's a little on the short side. I don't really put that much weight in height. I would put more weight in eye color than height, just because in an airplane things are a little confusing. You're not in, the standard size room with 80-inch door openings. You're in a weird aluminum tube, and most people are going to be seated the entire time, and some people that are standing are going to be hunched over a little bit. So I'm willing to have a lot more leeway on the height. Personally, I don't think height would be a reason to exclude Ted Braden, although there are many people in the Vortex that would disagree with me on that one. As far as eye color, do I think eye color eliminates Ted Braden? No, definitely not. Um, the lighting in the plane is a little weird. If he has eyes that are more hazel than green in a weirdly lit situation, would she say brown? Certainly.
Okay, though, about the height, though, are you trying to say that Ted Braden is thought to have been too short by some people's estimations? Like, would you like to talk about the height descriptions of DB Cooper?
Yeah, DB Cooper is believed to be from like 5'10" to 6 foot, and I want to say Ted Braden
Was
is Ted
five.
Braden 5'9". Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's not even far outside the range. Um I'm 5'7". It is kind of a stretch to confuse 5'10" and 5'7". I probably wouldn't do that. But 5'9", sure. I don't even think the height is a weird one because Cooper is seated almost the entire time. So for a
Absolutely.
stewardess to gauge his height is tough.
Okay, though, I think that those are all fair observations. But we have been talking about the suspects. And recently on Cooper Friday, I did a book discussion on Into the Blast by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins, and I also did a standalone episode on their DB Cooper suspect, Kenny Christiansen. What do you make of him?
Kenny Christiansen, because of my entry to the Vortex, is the first person I believed was DB Cooper. Um, and weirdly, I was probably most confident in him just because of sort of I don't want to say a lack of knowledge, but I hadn't done as much research at that point in time. So if you read Jeffrey Gray's book, it sort of points to Kenny Christensen. Jeffrey Gray goes on this adventure into the Cooper Vortex and into the community. And a lot of it is in this discussion of Kenny Christensen. And then at a certain point in the book, he says, hey, this private investigator stopped working with me because he's going to write his own book. And that's Skip Porteous. And Skip recruited, I think Skip's on the East Coast. And so he recruited a guy on the West Coast in the area, Robert Blevins, to help him out with the book, who is also a writer. And so they sort of dove into this story about Kenny Christensen. That book, Into the Blast, was the second book about DB Cooper that I ever read. So once I put that book down, Ned, I was so confident that Kenny Christensen was DB Cooper. I solved the case. Well, actually, Robert solved the case for me, but now I knew more than everyone else, and Kenny Christensen was DB Cooper. But I unfortunately got in the drop zone, which is mentioned in Into the Blast. And then I bought Bruce Smith's book, DB Cooper and the FBI, and then I lost all faith in Kenny Christensen. I would say Kenny Christensen is a really good match for the sketch, but before that, you have to start with his deathbed confession. And his deathbed confession is to his brother, and I'm paraphrasing this, but I've read this like 100 times, so it's probably pretty close. But on his deathbed to his brother, he says, hey, there's something I've got to tell you. And his brother says, it's okay, we already know. And then nothing comes of that. And then a few years later, his brother starts writing letters to directors, including Nora Ephron, the director of Sleepless in Seattle, saying that he believed his brother was D.B. Cooper, which is an interesting way to get attention to your story. But it's sort of believed that Kenny was most likely going to tell his brother that he was gay and not that he was D.B. Cooper. You look at Kenny Christiansen, there's sort of this number that gets thrown around. He had $200,000 in his savings account when he died. Kenny Christiansen got looked into like crazy once he became a suspect because at first glance it was really interesting. And thanks to all the people on the drop zone and all these crazy DB Cooper researchers, they were able to like pull his bank notes and find out his mortgage records and property that he sold. And they were basically able to account for all of his money. He never had a $200,000 influx of cash. But I think the thing that goes against Kenny more than anything else is he worked for Northwest Orient Airlines as a purser, which would have been sort of the manager of the flight crew, I guess. And he continued to work for the airline afterward. So the way those flight crews worked back then, and many still to this day, there was a potential you didn't know who you were going to be working with that day or that week. Maybe you would find out on Monday that you're going to be working with Harold and Susan on Thursday, or maybe you don't even find out till that Thursday morning and you're going to be working with Tom, Jeff, and Rita. You don't know. They sort of put those crews together. So the odds that he is not going to be recognized by anyone while he commits this hijacking are extremely rare. And then also he continues to work for the airline afterward, even being involved with the union. So if you work at Costco and you robbed them secretly at night, but then you continued to work there, are you going to make a name for yourself there as being the employee representative? It just doesn't make sense.
Okay, though, I would like to go through some of the points because you said that Into the Blast was the second D.B. Cooper book you ever read. I read it just about 2 weeks ago, so because this is fresh in my mind, let's go through some of the points with Kenny Christiansen. Number one, he was a trained skydiver and paratrooper in World War II, although he didn't get to use his skills in combat because the war had ended by the time he got there. He would have been extremely familiar with airplanes, first working, I guess, in mechanics, then becoming a flight attendant. And D.B. Cooper's using all of these types of airplane terminologies when he's on the flight, talking about how he knows where the oxygen tanks are. And as we already said, he wants the aft staircase down while the plane's in flight, and he wants the landing gear down. He really understood a lot about the aircrafts. Also, with the fact that Kenny Christiansen may have had an accomplice named Bernie Geisman, who's given the pseudonym Mike Watson in the book Into the Blast, and they spent the Thanksgiving of 1970 together. They did not spend the Thanksgiving of 71 together. They were off on some type of camping trip, so they said, and then they spend the Thanksgiving of 1972 together, and all of these things are just matching up like he's alone, I guess, in the woods or something with his best friend on the night of the skyjacking. He would have had the brain to pull this off, and he even had paratrooping experience. What do you make of all that?
Well, all of what you said is accurate, but it doesn't make me believe that Kenny Christiansen was D.B. Cooper. Kenny Christiansen also, the tail end of his military experience, I don't know if it was still in the military or he was working there as a civilian, but was working on like some, I don't know, it was an Alaskan island that was just like a refueling stop. Working on planes. And
go ahead.
Yeah, he knew about planes, he knew about skydiving, but again, as a point against Kenny Christiansen, Cooper knew that he could jump from those aft stairs, but he did not know how to lower them and had to be shown. And Kenny Christiansen, 1,000,000% would have known how to lower the aft stairs.
Right, like what I said during my Kenny Christiansen episodes is he's about a 5 out of 10 suspect, like a 50%. And that's not a good score because whatever point you have in favor of him being DB Cooper, you have to take one away. Intimate knowledge of the airplanes? Oh, yeah, but he doesn't know how to lower the aft stairs. Or even the whole concept of somebody who is just disgruntled and he's mad because the airlines are going on strike. He's mad because as a flight attendant and a purser, he can't get regular work. Oh, but he stays with the airline for years after the skyjacking, and as you just said, goes on to become like an even more public figure, not really a public figure, but more prominent figure among them. So it's all of these things are just in complete contradiction. That was my overall takeaway from Into the Blast, as well as just reading the suspect profiles.
It's a good book, though. I
It's
am a big
very
fan
entertaining.
of Robert Blevins as a writer.
It's very smooth, like some books you can just sit down and they're just page turners. That's what I thought.
Yeah, Robert Blevins is an absolute great writer and a definite figure in the Vortex.
Okay, though, but if we're going to talk about the books now, as I understand, you've read about 50 books on the D.B. Cooper case. Which one was the best?
I really like D.B. Cooper and the FBI by Bruce Smith. It covers so much of the case. His second edition, I think that came out in like 2015, 2016. It covers every aspect of the case. It covers multiple suspects. It covers wild theories. It covers hard facts. It's fantastic. It doesn't necessarily point you to a specific angle. It's just sort of a broad, wide overview on the case. There's, oh gosh, picking a favorite book would be a tough one. I would break the books down into three separate categories. I would break them into pre-internet, and then I would break them into post-internet, pre-FBI files, and then the final category would be post-FBI files. And Bruce Smith's third edition of that book includes a lot of the FBI files. Ryan Burns right now is working on a book almost specifically about the FBI files. You had Dr. Bob Edwards, a mathematician, write a book on the flight path and the drop zone. D.B. Cooper and Flight 305, which is fantastic. And it's not so much like suspects or the hijacking or who did what. It's a really crazy in-depth examination of where the plane was, the weather conditions, if he pulled at what altitude, the winds blowing at what altitudes, and where he would fall. It's a really interesting book. Martin Andrade's book, Finding D.B. Cooper, Chasing the Last Lead. That one it could be my favorite because the main point of that book is proving that he survived the jump. It's not, they don't have a suspect they're pitching. Their angle on that book, him and his father, is an examination of, did he survive this jump? And it's really tough to argue with their conclusion that he did. So that might be my favorite. Oh, there's also The Legend of D.B. Cooper, Death by Natural Causes, about Barb Dayton. And I do love the Barb Dayton story.
Okay, this question's going to go in a different direction, but because we were talking about the books, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper every Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio, Ripper Wednesday. And there are a lot of books that have been written about Jack the Ripper, but he's used as a fictional character. He goes up against Sherlock Holmes as the villain. He's also viewed as somewhat of a sympathetic figure in other books, but he is used as a character in novels. Do you think that it would be unethical for someone to use D.B. Cooper as a fictional character, maybe make him look like a hero, or maybe just make him look like a sympathetic character, maybe even just make him the protagonist? If someone were to write a novel about D.B. Cooper and make him look cool or portray him in a positive light, would that be an unethical thing to do?
No, not at all. I've read several books on D.B. Cooper that are fictional. There's a book, Incendiary, by Clark Meyer. That's fantastic, sort of an action suspense book. There's a gal named Lynn that wrote a book, The Man in 1818E, about D.B. Cooper and time travel, which is really interesting. There's a book, D.B. Cooper's Money. I'm sorry, I forget the name of that author, but it's basically like it starts complete post hijacking, and he's just living his life alone in the woods. Sort of an interesting book. Not a survival book, but he's living in a cabin alone in the woods. But
Yes.
yeah, I don't see a problem at all in doing that. With Cooper, it's pretty easy to do that because he didn't physically hurt anyone. And even Tina Mucklow, who sat next to him for at least 3.5 hours immediately post hijacking, she's commenting about how he was polite and kind and never unfriendly. So you can use Cooper as like sort of a James Bond anti-hero kind of guy in your writing and get away with it. I think that's why so many people have confessed to the crime. I guarantee you there are 1,000 times more people that have confessed to being DB Cooper than the Zodiac because it's not wildly offensive.
Yes, and I talk about the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio. Those are the three main stories that I follow, and I really rank them in terms of like severity of their crimes. That DB Cooper would be the least vicious. I mean, he wasn't even a murderer. Then the Zodiac Killer, then Jack the Ripper. Because Jack the Ripper's a serial killer that's mutilating women's bodies and cutting out their organs and so on. And to the best of our knowledge, DB Cooper didn't do anything like that, at least not in what we know about him. I don't think he did, though. I
I
don't think
haven't
he did.
read any 302s where he tore women apart.
Yes, yes. Well, who knows? Well, we can actually come back to this thing though, because there are people who get accused of murders that are connected to the DB Cooper case. John Emil List is a suspect we didn't get to talk about, and there is you've had the guy on your show, the Cooper Vortex. I forget his name, the guy that thinks that John Emil List was DB Cooper, but he was a family annihilator and convicted murderer. What's his name?
Actually, he didn't believe that List was Cooper. The guy I had on my show, his name was Joe Sharkey. He wrote a book about John List, about his life, about his crime, about his life after the crime, and about getting caught on America's Most Wanted. And he thought the DB Cooper thing was ridiculous. But the reason I had him on is because John List was a DB Cooper suspect. John List commits his crime, I want to say like late October of 71. And then the hijacking takes place November of 71. And John List, boy, did he look like the sketch, just like everyone else. And then he's never found. And Ryan Burns has said this before, and I just love that line, even though I hate to quote Ryan Burns. But he said that if John List was never caught, he would have been the patron saint of no poll. And what that means is, if you're not as deep in the vortex as myself, is that if John List was never caught, then we could have always said it was John List and that he died in a no poll scenario. Because the timeline just matches up too perfectly. He goes on the run. He's going to need money to start his new life. He's an exact match for the sketch. And so, boom, it's John List. But lucky for us, we caught John List. And John List, if you think John List could be DB Cooper, then listen to this. I just mentioned that thousands of people had admitted to being DB Cooper. Well, John List admitting to killing his entire family and his mother or mother-in-law, I'm sorry, I forget, and then said he was not DB Cooper. If you're going to admit to killing your entire family, wouldn't you also admit to doing the other crime that's not nearly as terrible and heinous and crazy? I think you would, because he already got 5 consecutive life sentences or whatever. So why not admit to your other crimes as well? But even in talking to Joe Sharkey, John List had a leg injury that occasionally, and like in cold weather, would cause him to limp. He wasn't an athletic guy. He had no military experience, not like paratrooper skydiving experience. And it just was completely outside of his character. So obviously it's not John List, but until we caught him, he definitely was an interesting suspect.
Right, and I think it's always good to try and talk to people if they want to try and dispel a particular type of theory in the true crime world. So on that note, I want to ask you this question. Is there a particular D.B. Cooper book or D.B. Cooper theory that you just absolutely did not care for? And I'm trying to find a way of paraphrasing what is the worst book or theory that you've encountered, but I don't want to say it like that because that sounds so pessimistic. But is there just one that you just absolutely disagreed with 100%? No, and just more or less closed the book and walked away from?
Absolutely. And I think you'll agree with me on this one. It's that D.B. Cooper and the Zodiac are the same person. There are a couple of books out there on the topic of sort of a one killer to commit all crimes kind of a thing. And occasionally D.B. Cooper and the Zodiac are thrown together in that. I did a few episodes on that, and I was sort of so bothered by it. And I got a couple emails like, "Oh no, I thought this show was serious, and now you're just doing nonstop DB Cooper as the Zodiac." So I actually felt like I had to do an episode on DB Cooper as not the Zodiac. So I got James Cook, a friend of mine who just really, really well versed in Zodiac and isn't on one theory or another. He's sort of agnostic on things to talk about Cooper being the Zodiac. And of course, from his point of view, it's just like, no, that's ridiculous. But yeah, that would be the one that I just can't get behind. The Zodiac and Cooper are completely different MOs. Cooper made sure that people were cared for and took money but didn't harm anyone. The Zodiac seemed to harm people for fun, kill for sport, and maybe he took a trophy or two, but he definitely wasn't about robbing anyone.
Okay, though, I'm going to ask you a total devil's advocate question. If you were so opposed to the Zodiac D.B. Cooper theory, why did you have multiple guests on your show talking about it?
Because that's their theory. I'll have anyone on the show. If you have a theory that is well fleshed out enough that Tommy Wiseau is DB Cooper, and you have enough information to support that you can talk to me about it for 90 minutes, or you wrote a book on it, then I would love to have you on the show. And anyone that writes a book on Cooper, they're welcome on my show, whatever your theory is. And on my show, I'm just presenting your theory and your case. I'm just holding the microphone for you. And it's up to the audience to decide who's right, who's wrong, who's a genius, who's crazy, who's onto something, and who's conning us.
Oh, yes, I agree, because as you've stated, I follow the Zodiac Killer mystery, and I talk about a lot of those theories that are not widely accepted by people, and I get those emails as well. But my whole stance was kind of similar to what you said. Leave no stone unturned, give everybody a chance. And the fact that we have to give everybody a chance means that we're going to talk about some more of the far out claims. If you didn't give them a chance, then you might be overlooking somebody else who has good ideas that is just not as famous. So it's like if someone has written the book, or even if they have just composed a set of observations, maybe they're doing a YouTube video series, maybe they're just a poster on the forums who has like written out essay length comments and so on. Yes, I will talk about their material. So it sounds like we're kind of in the same boat on that. But then I have to throw this one to you. Have you ever encountered a DB Cooper theory that you absolutely would not talk about?
Yes, I have. I actually started recording an episode with someone. Like, we're in email contact. Hey, we're setting this up. It's going to be Tuesday at 7. Tuesday at 7 rolls around. I'm like, hey, you ready to do this? Yep, let's go. Let's party. I push the record button. We start the show. And then this person started making wild statements and claims about people that were alive. and theories and ideas that weren't out in the public yet. And so I actually stopped the show and I was like, hey, you know, I'm I'm not the place for you to release these ideas if they haven't been vetted by other people. So if you want to get these ideas out there, and then you can come on the show and talk about it, but I'm not going to be the one to put out accusations against people that are alive. And I'm not going to say I'm the most morally correct or upstanding person on the subject, because I have had people on the show say wild things about people that have passed away. So is that the right thing to do? I don't know. There isn't a legal liability in saying, I could say right now that Mother Teresa is DB Cooper. I believe that for sure. Yeah, she did it. And a whole bunch of other crazy stuff too. There isn't liability there because Mother Teresa passed away. But if Mother Teresa is alive and I run around saying she committed crimes, there could be some legal responsibility there. So I canceled that episode for that reason, not because I wasn't willing to put that out. There were people that were, I would call them troublemakers in the community, where I just didn't really ask them to be on the show. But I don't think there is like a theory or idea that I would not put out on the show unless, like I mentioned, there's some sort of like legal hesitancy to do so.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that because I do have a follow-up, actually two follow-ups. The first would be, it sounds like you can't talk about what that guest was sharing, but what was the reason for not revealing it or not wanting it on your show? Was it obscene? Was it like some profane things? Or were they just accusing a living person of being DB Cooper?
They were accusing living people of actual crimes and being complicit in crimes.
Okay.
So it related and not related to Cooper. So, in doing this, sometimes you run across wild people that say wild stuff. And sometimes it's great. And sometimes you want to put a microphone in front of that person. And sometimes you run into someone that's too wild and you have to take the microphone away.
Now, I might know who you're talking about. Does this have a zodiac angle that's connected to it?
No, it does not.
Okay, then it's a different person, but we'll have to do a follow-up about that off the air. But I explored this a lot on Black Box Online Radio, and my hesitancies are going in a different direction. For me, it's mostly drawing the line about stuff like UFOs and aliens. I mean, if we do a UFO episode, well, that's fine. Let's talk about UFOs. But once they start incorporating them like into missing persons cases, oh, I think this person disappeared because they were abducted by aliens. That's usually where I draw the line and just say, you can talk about that if you want, but I'm not going to incorporate that. And like, if someone actually did approach you about DB Cooper being abducted by aliens and that's why he was never caught, what would you think of that? Would you put that on your show?
I wouldn't put that on my show unless they had a piece of work to accompany it. So if they truly believed that and they wrote a book on how Cooper was abducted by aliens, then absolutely, Ned, I'm having him on my show. If someone just emails me and says, hey, man, I think that DB Cooper got abducted by aliens, man, then no, I'm not having that person on the show.
Wow, fascinating, yes. So, Darren, what are your plans for the Cooper Vortex? What do you have on the horizon? How is the show expanding? How is the show growing? And what are you looking forward to creating in the future?
How is the show growing and expanding? That's an interesting question. I don't know if it is. I've had like motivation to get after it and do stuff in the past, but with this case, it's so niche that I don't want to chase people that don't belong on the show. So I don't want to just go after this guy and this guy or whoever emails me, or I can talk to whoever I want. I only want people that really know the case well on the show. I don't want people that don't belong on there. And then the number of people that can talk about DB Cooper in a serious manner for over 90 minutes, that number of people is not big. So my number of guests that I'd like to have is getting smaller and smaller. Also, this case being 53 years old now, I've had people that have been on the show that have passed away, and people I wanted on the show that passed away before I started or passed away before I was able to get them on the show. So I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm just going to keep doing the show the way I think it should be done. I'll do an episode whenever I have the right guest. Sometimes that's 2 or 3 episodes a month, or sometimes it's 1 episode every 2 or 3 months. But the big thing I got going on right now is CooperCon. Are you coming to that?
No, I'll be a little bit far away, but it sounds like it's going to be a good one this year.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. November 15th through the 17th, Seattle Museum of Flight. dbcooperevents.com for more info. But if you're interested in this or you're already in the community, everyone you know will be there. Authors, everything. It's a great time. I have all these friends in this community and people I talk to all the time, but I only get to see them once a year at this event.
Okay, yes, and right now, Darren, I would like to give you the floor and just say, do you have a final send-off for the listeners of Black Box Online Radio? And you can talk a little bit more about your show if you want, but I'm really just going to pass the mic over to you, and you can share anything you would like as a concluding message.
My only concluding message is come see me at CooperCon and check out the Cooper Vortex podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks for having me on, Ned. I appreciate it.
Darren Schaefer, thank you so much.